Some women don't destroy families with screaming or chaos, my late husband used to say. They do it quietly, with a smile and a casserole dish in their hands. I didn't understand what he meant until the night my daughter-in-law leaned close to me at Thanksgiving dinner and whispered words that made my entire body go cold. The dining room smelled like roasted turkey, cinnamon sweet potatoes, and fresh rolls brushed with butter. Outside the windows, cold November rain slid slowly down the glass, while soft jazz played from the kitchen speaker Daniel had installed for me last Christmas. Everything looked warm, safe, normal. My son sat at the head of the table carving turkey, while my grandchildren argued over cranberry sauce and dinner rolls. Claire stood beside him with one hand resting lightly on his shoulder, smiling that gentle smile everyone seemed to adore. To anyone watching us, we looked like one of those families from holiday commercials. Comfortable suburban home in Connecticut. Family photos lining the hallway. Candles glowing across the dining room table. A perfect American Thanksgiving. But something about Claire felt wrong that night. I noticed it the moment she arrived wearing a cream-colored sweater dress and gold earrings I'd never seen before. She hugged me longer than usual when she walked in, and when she pulled away, she looked directly into my eyes for just a second too long. It wasn't affection. It wasn't warmth. It looked more like someone preparing for something difficult. "You okay, Claire?" I asked while taking her coat. "Of course," she said softly. "Why wouldn't I be?" Then she smiled. That same polished smile she always used whenever she wanted people to stop asking questions. Claire had mastered that smile years ago. She knew exactly how to look sweet without looking fake. Daniel always said I was imagining things whenever I brought up my concerns about her. "Mom, Claire bends over backward for this family," he told me once after I mentioned how uncomfortable she made me feel sometimes. Not everybody is secretly plotting something. Maybe he was right. Maybe loneliness had made me suspicious. After Harold died 3 years ago, silence became my closest companion. The house felt too large for one person, and I knew I leaned too heavily on Daniel at times. I tried to remind myself of that whenever doubt crept into my mind. But still, throughout dinner, I kept catching Claire staring at me. Not openly, just little glances between conversations. Between bites of turkey. Between fake laughs at Daniel's jokes. Every single time our eyes met, she looked away immediately. Halfway through dessert, Daniel stood up to refill drinks while the children ran upstairs to play video games. The room grew quieter then. Softer. Rain tapped against the windows while forks scraped gently against pie plates. Claire suddenly stood from her chair and walked around the table toward me. I thought she was going to ask if I wanted more coffee. Instead, she placed one hand lightly against the back of my chair and leaned down beside me, so close I could smell her expensive perfume. Vanilla and something sharper underneath it. "Margaret," she whispered carefully, her voice calm enough to terrify me instantly. "I'm pregnant, and Daniel can never know who the father is." For a second, I honestly thought I had misunderstood her. My hearing wasn't perfect anymore. Sometimes words blurred together in crowded rooms. I turned slowly toward her, certain she would laugh and correct herself. But Claire wasn't smiling anymore. Her expression had gone completely still. Cold. Her eyes stayed fixed on mine as if she were studying my reaction. I felt my chest tighten, so suddenly I had to grip the edge of the table beneath the tablecloth. Around us, nobody noticed anything strange. Daniel laughed in the kitchen while opening another bottle of wine. The dishwasher hummed softly behind him. One of the grandchildren shouted upstairs. The world continued moving like normal while my entire reality cracked open in silence. "Claire," I barely managed to whisper. She straightened immediately before I could say another word. Then, as smoothly as an actress stepping back on a stage, she smiled again and picked up the empty pie plates. "Who wants coffee?" she asked cheerfully to the room. Daniel looked over at her and smiled with complete trust. "You always save Thanksgiving," he said warmly. Claire laughed softly and kissed his cheek as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just planted a secret inside my chest heavy enough to crush an entire family. I do not remember driving home that night. I remember the rain. I remember the red glow of brake lights smeared across wet roads and the sound of my windshield wipers moving back and forth like a metronome counting down to something terrible. But the actual drive itself felt like a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached long after I pulled into my driveway. The porch lights switched on automatically as I stepped out of the car, illuminating the empty front yard Harold used to decorate every Thanksgiving with little white lights and wooden pumpkins. For the first time since his death, the house did not feel lonely. It felt unsafe. I locked the front door behind me and stood perfectly still in the kitchen while the refrigerator hummed softly in the silence. Claire's words replayed in my mind over and over again. Daniel can never know who the father is. Not might not. Not, I made a mistake. She had said it with certainty. Calm certainty. That was the part one could not stop thinking about. Claire had not sounded ashamed. She had not sounded emotional or panicked. She sounded prepared. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hand shook badly enough that some spilled across the granite countertop. I stared at the droplets sliding slowly toward the edge and suddenly remembered another Thanksgiving almost 5 years earlier. Claire had been standing in this same kitchen helping me wash dishes while Daniel watched football in the living room. She had smiled at me then and said, "You know, Margaret, some women are lucky enough to marry into families that actually matter." At the time, I thought it was an awkward compliment. Now I wondered if it had been something else entirely. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Claire leaning close to me beneath the warm dining room lights, whispering into my ear while the rest of the family laughed only a few feet away. Around 2 in the morning, I finally gave up trying to sleep and walked downstairs wrapped in Harold's old navy robe. Rain still tapped lightly against the windows. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea growing cold between my hands while memories started surfacing one after another like objects floating up from dark water. Little things. Small moments I had ignored because I wanted peace more than truth. Last spring, Claire suddenly became protective of her phone after years of casually leaving it anywhere in the house. Then there was the weekend conference in Boston she took alone in September even though Daniel originally planned to go with her. She convinced him to stay home with the children because she claimed it would be boring business meetings. And then there was the night 2 months ago when I stopped by unexpectedly with soup after Daniel mentioned Claire was sick. Her car was not in the driveway, even though she had supposedly been home all day. Daniel laughed it off later and said she probably went to the pharmacy. At the time, I believed him because believing him was easier. But now every memory felt different. Sharper somehow. Like turning over puzzle pieces and finally seeing the image underneath. Around 3:30 in the morning, I opened the old cedar box where Harold used to keep important papers. Insurance documents, property taxes, family records. My fingers paused over a yellow envelope with Harold's handwriting across the front. For Margaret. My chest tightened instantly. Harold had been gone 3 years, but some nights I still expected to hear his footsteps in the hallway. I slowly opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The paper had softened with age. "You always trust people longer than you should," his handwriting read. "That is one of the reasons I love you. But if something ever feels wrong, do not ignore it just to keep the family comfortable." Tears filled my eyes before I even realized I was crying. Harold had always seen things before I did. He noticed tension hidden behind smiles. He paid attention to pauses in conversations and changes in tone. I used to tease him for being suspicious. Now I wished desperately that he were. Sitting across from me at the kitchen table telling me exactly what to do. Instead, I was alone with a secret that felt poisonous. At 7 the next morning, my phone buzzed beside my coffee cup. A text message from Claire. "Thank you again for dinner last night. Everything was beautiful." I stared at the screen in disbelief. Beneath the message was a smiling heart emoji. My stomach turned. A second message appeared almost immediately after the first. "And thank you for keeping our little conversation private." I read the words 3 times. Not a request. A warning. I suddenly understood something that made my blood run cold. Claire had not whispered that secret because she trusted me. She whispered it because she wanted me afraid. The strangest part about betrayal is how ordinary life continues around it. The mail still arrives. Grocery stores still play Christmas music in November. Neighbors still wave while walking their dogs as if the world has not shifted beneath your feet overnight. 3 days after Thanksgiving, I stood in the produce section of Fairview Market staring at apples without remembering why I needed them. My shopping cart remained half empty while Claire's messages replayed endlessly in my head. I had not answered her text. She had not sent another one either, which somehow unsettled me even more. It felt intentional, controlled, like she knew silence would affect me more deeply than pressure. I reached for a bag of Granny Smith apples when I suddenly heard Claire's voice behind me. Margaret. My heart nearly stopped. I turned too quickly, knocking a lemon from a display pyramid onto the floor. Claire stood there wearing a camel-colored coat with her dark hair tucked neatly behind her ears. She looked polished and calm, carrying a small basket with peppermint coffee creamer and organic baby spinach inside. Completely normal. Completely composed. "You look pale," she said gently. "Are you feeling okay?" I bent slowly to pick up the lemon, mostly to buy myself a second to breathe. "I am fine," I answered carefully. "Just tired." Claire smiled sympathetically and stepped closer. "The holidays can do that." Her tone sounded warm enough that anyone nearby would have assumed she was a caring daughter-in-law checking on family. But her eyes told a different story. They watched me too closely. Studied me. "Daniel says you have not been answering calls much lately," she continued. "He worries about you being alone so much." There it was again. That subtle pressure hidden beneath concern. I forced a small smile. "I have simply been busy." Claire nodded slowly before lightly touching my arm. "Good. I would hate for him to think something was wrong." She let the sentence hang there between us for one long, uncomfortable second before stepping back. Then, just like that, her sweet public smile returned. "Well, I should get going. The children want gingerbread cookies tonight." She walked away, pushing her basket calmly through the crowded store while I stood frozen beside the apples. For the first time, I realized Claire enjoyed this. Not the secret itself, the control of it. Later that afternoon, Daniel stopped by unexpectedly, carrying takeout soup and fresh bread from the Italian bakery downtown. "You have been hiding from the world," he said with a grin as he entered the kitchen. "I figured somebody should check on you." I smiled and took the soup containers from his hands while studying his face carefully. My son looked exhausted. There were faint dark circles beneath his eyes and deeper lines around his mouth than I remembered even a month ago. "Long week?" I asked. Daniel sighed heavily. "Work has been insane. End-of-year numbers. Plus, Claire has not been feeling great lately." My chest tightened instantly. "What do you mean?" He shrugged while loosening his tie. "Just tired mostly. Nauseous some mornings." Then he smiled suddenly, almost shyly. "Actually, we have been talking about trying for another baby." I turned toward the counter before he could see my expression. Harold used to say that the hardest lies to survive were the ones wrapped inside hope. Daniel sounded hopeful now. Happy. I could hear it in his voice. "That would be wonderful," I managed to say quietly. "You think so?" he asked. "Claire worries we are starting over too late." "People raise children at all ages now," I replied, automatically while my mind raced. Daniel walked toward the family room and paused beside the hallway table where Harold's framed photograph still stood. "You know," he said softly, "Claire really admires how strong you were after Dad died." I nearly laughed at the irony of it. Admiration was not what I saw in Claire's eyes. "Does she?" I asked. "Of course," Daniel said. "She tells people all the time that you are the strongest woman she knows." Something inside me twisted painfully at that sentence because suddenly I understood another terrible possibility. Claire had not chosen me by accident. She whispered that secret to me because she knew exactly who I was. She knew I would protect Daniel before protecting myself. She knew I would carry unbearable things silently if it meant shielding my son from pain. The realization left me cold. After Daniel left that evening, I found myself standing in front of the hallway mirror for a very long time. At 69 years old, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Silver hair, tired eyes, a widow trying desperately to keep her family together while something rotten spread quietly beneath the surface. Then another memory surfaced suddenly and clearly. Last summer during a barbecue at Daniel's house, Claire had laughed while refilling lemonade glasses and said, "The Hale family legacy is really impressive when you think about it." At the time, I assumed she meant Harold's successful accounting business and the properties we owned. But now I remembered the exact way she said the word legacy. Not emotionally, financially, carefully, like someone measuring the value of something before deciding how to keep it. By the second week of December, I stopped trusting my own memories. Every conversation with Claire felt layered now, as though she had spent years speaking in sentences with hidden meanings only she understood. I found myself replaying old holidays in my head while wrapping gifts at the dining room table or folding laundry late at night. Tiny details returned with disturbing clarity. Claire asking questions about Harold's business accounts after his funeral. Claire volunteering to organize family paperwork when Daniel felt overwhelmed. Claire insisting repeatedly that I should eventually move into a smaller home because large houses become too much for widows. At the time, her concerns sounded practical, loving even. Now it sounded strategic. Snow began falling heavily one Friday evening while I sat in my living room staring at the Christmas tree lights glowing softly against the dark windows. The entire neighborhood looked peaceful beneath fresh snow. Across the street, children dragged sleds through front yards while parents carried grocery bags inside warm houses decorated with wreaths and red ribbons. Normal families. Simple families. I envied them more than I wanted to admit. My phone rang suddenly beside me. Daniel. I hesitated before answering. Hey Mom, he said warmly. Claire and I are heading to the mall tomorrow with the kids if you want to join us. I think I will stay home, I answered. There was a short pause. You sure? He asked carefully. You have been distant lately. Guilt pressed immediately against my chest because he sounded genuinely worried. I am only tired, I said softly. Nothing more. Daniel exhaled slowly. Claire thinks maybe you are still struggling more with Dad's death around the holidays than you admit. I closed my eyes. Of course she did. Claire had started shaping the narrative already. Quietly, patiently. Your wife seems very concerned about me lately. I replied before I could stop myself. Daniel laughed lightly. That is just who she is. She worries about everyone. I almost asked him if he still believed that completely. But I stopped myself. Harold always warned me that once people become emotionally dependent on someone, they protect that person automatically even when the truth sits directly in front of them. Well, Daniel continued, if you change your mind about tomorrow, let us know. Claire already booked lunch reservations at that little Italian place you like. Again, always thoughtful, always perfect. After the call ended, I sat silently for several minutes before walking upstairs to the spare bedroom where I kept old family photo albums. I carried one downstairs and opened it carefully beside the Christmas tree. There was Claire at 26 years old during her first Christmas with our family. Beautiful, elegant, smiling beside Daniel while wearing a red wool sweater and holding a tray of cookies she insisted on baking from scratch. I remembered how relieved I felt when Daniel married her. She seemed mature, stable, respectful, especially after his difficult relationship in college with a woman who constantly fought with him in public restaurants and once threw a glass of iced tea during an argument. Claire was the opposite of chaos. That was her greatest talent. She understood that calm women earn trust faster. As I turned another page, a photograph slipped from the album and landed face down on the carpet. I picked it up slowly and froze. It was from last summer's 4th of July barbecue. Claire stood near the patio smiling toward the camera while Daniel grilled hamburgers in the background. But my attention immediately fixed on the man standing beside her. Ethan Calloway, Harold's former business partner, 71 years old, recently divorced, wealthy, respected in town. My stomach tightened painfully as another memory surfaced. During that barbecue, I remembered seeing Claire and Ethan talking alone near the garden for almost 20 minutes while everyone else watched fireworks from the driveway. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Ethan had known Daniel since childhood. He practically felt like extended family. But now my mind returned to another detail I had ignored back then. When Claire walked back toward the patio that night, she looked nervous. Not guilty exactly. Alert, like someone checking whether anybody had noticed something they should not have. The next morning, I drove downtown to the cafe Harold used to visit every Saturday before he died. I ordered coffee and sat near the window trying to convince myself I was imagining connections that did not exist. Then the front door opened and Ethan Calloway walked inside. My entire body stiffened instantly. Ethan smiled warmly when he recognized me. Margaret Hale, he said pleasantly. It has been too long. He walked over carrying his coffee cup and sat across from me without hesitation. His gray coat still smelled faintly of winter air and expensive cologne. How are Daniel and Claire? He asked casually. I watched his face carefully. Too carefully, perhaps. They are doing well, I answered. Claire has been very busy lately. Ethan nodded once before looking down into his coffee. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but I noticed the reaction immediately. A flicker. Tiny. Almost invisible. Yet something about it made my pulse quicken. Then he smiled again. Calm. Controlled. She always was ambitious, he said quietly. After seeing Ethan at the cafe, I told myself I was being irrational. Wealthy older men and younger women spoke to each other every day without scandal hiding beneath the conversation. Claire had known Ethan for years through Harold's business connections. That alone meant nothing. But deep down, something had already shifted inside me. Instinct is a strange thing. At my age, you learn that your body notices danger long before your mind accepts it. That entire weekend, I could not stop replaying Ethan's expression when I mentioned Claire. It was subtle. Most people would never have caught it. But Harold used to spend decades negotiating contracts with clients who lied for a living, and he taught me how to watch faces carefully. Real emotion appears for less than a second before people hide it again. Ethan reacted. I was sure of it. Monday morning arrived gray and bitterly cold. Frost coated the neighborhood lawns while delivery trucks rumbled through the streets before sunrise. I was pouring coffee into my travel mug when my phone rang unexpectedly. Claire. I stared at her name on the screen before finally answering. Good morning, she said sweetly. I hope I did not wake you. I have been awake for hours, I replied carefully. Well, I was wondering if you could come by this afternoon, she said. Daniel has meetings all day, and I could really use help wrapping Christmas presents. Her tone sounded casual, almost cheerful. Too cheerful. I thought you were not feeling well lately, I said. There was the briefest pause before she laughed softly. Pregnancy exhaustion comes and goes. Hearing her say the word out loud made my stomach tighten again. I see, I answered quietly. So you are telling people now? Only family, Claire replied. We are waiting until after Christmas for a bigger announcement. The word bothered me more than it should have. I can stop by around 2, I finally said. Perfect, Claire answered warmly. The children will be at school, so it will just be us. The moment the call ended, I regretted agreeing to go. Still, by early afternoon, I found myself driving toward Daniel's house beneath a pale winter sky. The neighborhood looked exactly like every upper-middle-class suburb in New England during December. Inflatable snowmen in front yards, wreaths hanging from doors, garlands wrapped around mailboxes, families pretending everything inside their homes matched the perfection outside. Claire opened the front door before I even knocked. She wore soft gray leggings and an oversized cream sweater that made her appear younger and more delicate than usual. Thank you for coming, she said warmly while stepping aside. Cinnamon candles burned throughout the house, and quiet Christmas music drifted from hidden speakers. Everything looked immaculate. Not a toy out of place. Not a single dish in the sink. Tea, she offered. Please. She led me into the kitchen and carefully poured hot water into 2 white mugs while speaking casually about school schedules and holiday shopping. Watching her move around the kitchen unsettled me deeply because she appeared so completely at ease. No guilt. No anxiety. Nothing. Finally, she handed me a mug and leaned lightly against the marble countertop. Daniel says you seem distant lately, she said softly. There it was again, always circling back to my emotional state. Slowly building the image that I was fragile, lonely, unstable. I have simply been thinking a lot lately, I replied. Claire nodded sympathetically. Grief changes people. I looked directly at her then. Does lying change people too? The kitchen fell silent instantly. Claire did not flinch, did not panic. She simply lowered her tea mug onto the counter with calm precision. That depends on why someone lies, she answered quietly. My pulse quickened. Does Daniel know? The baby is not his. For the first time since Thanksgiving, the mask slipped slightly. Not fear. Annoyance. You really should be careful asking questions you are not prepared to hear answers to, she said. Then tell me the truth. Claire stared at me for several long seconds before walking slowly toward the kitchen island where a stack of Christmas cards sat beside a bowl of pine cones. You know what your problem is, Margaret? She asked calmly. You still think families survive because of honesty. I felt cold all over. Families survive because people choose comfort over truth every single day, she continued. That is what marriage is. That is what loyalty really is. You are talking about deception, I whispered. Claire tilted her head slightly. No, I am talking about protection. Then she placed one hand gently against her stomach. Daniel adores this family. He adores this home. The children worship him. Do you really believe destroying all of that would make you noble? Her words hit me harder than I expected because for one terrifying moment, I understood the temptation of silence. Daniel was happy. The children were safe. Christmas lights glowed softly around the room while snow drifted peacefully outside the windows. Telling the truth would shatter everything. Claire watched my face carefully and smiled faintly, almost knowingly. That is what I thought, she said softly. After I left Claire's house that afternoon, the silence in my car felt heavier than it had any right to be. Snow had started falling again, soft and steady, covering the streets of the neighborhood in a clean white layer that made everything look untouched and peaceful. But inside my mind, nothing was peaceful anymore. Her words followed me like shadows I could not shake. Families survive because people choose comfort over truth. I kept repeating it, trying to understand whether she was confessing something or simply justifying herself. By the time I reached home, the sky had already darkened. I did not turn on the lights immediately. I stood in the entryway with my coat still on, listening to the quiet hum of the house, trying to decide what kind of person I had become by staying silent this long. That was when I noticed the envelope. It was sitting neatly on the kitchen counter, placed where I would immediately see it. No stamp, no handwriting on the outside, just my name printed in careful block letters. My stomach tightened instantly. I knew I had not put it there. Slowly, I opened it. Inside were printed documents, bank records, transaction summaries, dates, names, and at the bottom, a photograph. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. Claire and Ethan Calloway, standing together outside a private restaurant downtown. Not speaking, not casually interacting. Close enough that it did not look accidental. My hand began to tremble slightly as I set the papers down. There was a single note attached. You are being watched more carefully than you think. No signature. No explanation. I sat down at the kitchen table, unable to process how this had appeared in my home without warning. My first instinct was Daniel. But something inside me rejected that immediately. Daniel did not think like this. He avoided confrontation, avoided suspicion, avoided anything that disrupted his sense of stability. Claire, on the other hand, thrived on control. Every move she made seemed calculated. But this felt different. This felt like someone outside the family had stepped into it. The next morning, I did something I had not done in years. I drove to Harold's old storage unit on the edge of town. It was a small brick building behind a row of auto repair shops, the kind of place people forget exists unless they have something to hide or something to protect. Harold had always said he kept certain documents there in case he ever needed them quickly. I had never asked questions. I should have. The lock clicked open easily. Inside, the air smelled like dust and cold metal. I moved slowly through the narrow space until I found the filing cabinet he used to label in his precise handwriting. Section 3. Financial Records. My hands hesitated before opening it. Inside were folders I had never seen before, and one envelope marked with a single word. Claire. My breath caught. I opened it. What I found was not emotional speculation. It was documentation. Records of meetings between Harold and Ethan over the last year of Harold's life. Notes about changes in business partnerships, sudden restructuring discussions, and references to Claire that made no sense at first glance. Then I saw it. A series of emails printed and highlighted. Claire had been present at multiple financial meetings involving Harold's estate planning discussions. Meetings I had never been told about. Meetings that included questions about asset distribution after Harold's passing. I leaned back against the cold metal shelf, trying to steady myself. Harold had known. Or at least, he had suspected. That realization hit harder than anything else so far. My husband had been preparing for something I had not been allowed to see. I left the storage unit with the envelope tucked carefully inside my coat. Driving home felt different now. Every stoplight felt longer. Every intersection felt like a decision I could not reverse. When I arrived, Daniel's car was already in the driveway. Claire's was not. That detail alone made my chest tighten. Inside the house, Daniel was in the kitchen washing dishes. He turned when I entered and smiled. Hey, Mom. Claire went to pick up the kids. Everything okay? I hesitated. Have you ever asked Claire about Ethan Calloway? The smile disappeared from his face immediately. Why would I ask her about Ethan? He said carefully. They know each other through old family connections. I placed the envelope gently on the counter between us. Daniel wiped his hands on a towel and stared at it for a long moment before slowly opening it. As he read, his expression changed in stages. Confusion, disbelief, then something closer to discomfort. This has to be some kind of misunderstanding, he said finally. Mom, this is old business paperwork. Look at the dates, I replied quietly. Look at the timing. He shook his head. You are trying to connect things that are not connected. Then explain why Claire was at financial meetings about your father's estate, I said. Daniel froze slightly. That was the first real crack I had seen. Not denial. Not anger. Uncertainty. Before he could respond, the front door opened. Claire walked in carrying grocery bags, smiling as if nothing in the world had shifted. She looked at Daniel first, then at me. And in that instant, I understood something deeply unsettling. Claire did not need to defend herself. Not yet. Because she already knew the most important truth of all. She still had control over what Daniel believed. The moment Claire stepped through the front door with those grocery bags, the atmosphere in the house shifted in a way that was almost impossible to explain. It was not visible. It was not loud. But it was immediate. Daniel straightened slightly, as if his body had reacted before his thoughts caught up. I watched him carefully, then looked back at Claire. She set the bags on the counter with slow precision, her movements calm and familiar, as if nothing unusual had happened in the last hour. I picked up ingredients for dinner, she said casually. I thought we could make something simple tonight. Her eyes briefly met mine, then moved away again without hesitation. Not avoidance. Control. Daniel walked toward her, taking one of the bags from the counter. Mom brought some documents by, he said evenly, though I could hear the tension beneath his voice. Claire did not react immediately. She opened the refrigerator, placed a carton of milk inside, and closed the door before answering. What kind of documents? She asked softly. I stepped forward and placed the envelope on the kitchen island again, exactly where it had been before. Financial records, I said. From your meetings with Ethan Callaway and my late husband. The kitchen became quiet in a way that felt unnatural, as if even the refrigerator had grown louder in response to the silence. Claire finally turned toward the envelope. She did not rush. She did not appear startled. Instead, she walked closer and glanced at the contents Daniel had already seen earlier. This, she said calmly, is old administrative paperwork that was handled during estate planning discussions years ago. Daniel looked between us. You told my mother you attended those meetings? He asked Claire. Of course I did, she replied gently. Harold asked me to be present for certain family discussions. I was helping organize documents. Nothing more. Her voice was steady, almost soothing. The kind of tone used when correcting a misunderstanding rather than defending against an accusation. I studied her carefully. There was no panic. No hesitation. Only structure. Then why was Ethan Callaway involved in those same meetings? I asked. Claire turned slightly, folding her hands together in front of her. Ethan was a financial advisor connected to your husband's business network, she said. It is normal for multiple advisors to be present during estate planning. Daniel nodded slowly, as if trying to anchor himself to something familiar. That makes sense, he said quietly, but I noticed he did not look fully convinced. Claire stepped closer to him and placed a hand gently on his arm. Daniel, she said softly, your mother has been through a lot. Grief can make people reinterpret memories in ways that feel real, but are not always accurate. That sentence landed exactly where it was intended. Daniel turned slightly toward me. Mom, are you sure you are not misunderstanding this? He asked. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger, but something heavier. Frustration mixed with helpless clarity. I am not misunderstanding anything, I said. I saw the records. I saw the timing. This is not imagination. Claire sighed softly, almost sympathetically. Margaret, she said, using my name as if calming a distressed patient. No one is trying to deceive you. Then she added, we are trying to protect Daniel from unnecessary stress. That word again. Protect. Always protection. Always framing silence as care. Daniel exhaled and rubbed his forehead. Maybe we should all just calm down, he said. This is clearly a misunderstanding. I looked at my son then. Really looked at him. And I saw something I had not fully admitted before. He was not choosing her over me out of malice. He was choosing stability over discomfort. Claire had built her position carefully, not through force, but through consistency. Every calm response, every measured explanation, every gentle correction of my perception. It all worked together like a system designed to make doubt look unreasonable. Claire picked up the envelope again and closed it gently. If there are concerns, she said softly, we can have a family attorney review everything again. But I promise you, there is nothing hidden here. She smiled faintly, then added, we all want the same thing. A peaceful home. Then she turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving Daniel and me standing in the kitchen with a silence that felt heavier than before. After she left the room, Daniel spoke quietly. "Mom, I need you to trust me on this," he said. "Claire would never do anything to hurt this family." I did not answer immediately, because what I was beginning to understand was something far more complicated than simple deception. Claire was not trying to destroy the family openly. She was redefining what the family was allowed to believe. And right now, she was winning. The invitation arrived on a Thursday morning, slipped quietly into the mailbox as if it belonged there more than anything else in my life at that moment. I did not recognize the handwriting at first. Elegant, slightly curved letters written in black ink on thick cream-colored paper. When I opened it, I realized it was for a baby shower. Claire's baby shower. The words were printed in soft gold lettering at the top, followed by a carefully written message underneath. "We would be honored if you joined us in celebrating the upcoming arrival of our little blessing." I sat at the kitchen table for a long time holding that card without moving. The house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock above the stove. Outside, the neighborhood looked unchanged. Cars passing slowly on the wet winter streets, neighbors decorating their porches with lights and wreaths. Everything continued as if nothing inside my world was breaking apart. But inside, I felt something shift. This was not just an invitation. It was a stage being prepared, a carefully arranged moment where everyone would be watching. That evening, Daniel called while I was still staring at the invitation. "Did you get the baby shower invite?" he asked warmly. "Claire was hoping you would come." "I received it," I replied carefully. "Are you going?" he asked. There was hope in his voice. Hope that I would simply accept things as they were. "I do not know yet," I said honestly. Daniel sighed softly. "Mom, I really wish you would try to move forward with this. Claire has been so stressed lately, and she feels like you do not accept her." I closed my eyes. "This is not about acceptance," I said quietly. "Then what is it about?" he asked. I hesitated, because anything I said next would change something permanently. "It is about truth," I finally said. Daniel did not respond immediately. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "Sometimes truth is not as important as peace," he said. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. Peace. That word again. Always used as a reason to avoid looking closer. The following days passed in a strange stillness. Claire did not contact me directly, but Daniel mentioned her frequently. She was planning decorations. She was organizing seating arrangements. She was making sure the children would feel involved. Each detail sounded thoughtful on the surface, but I began to notice a pattern. Everything she did placed her at the center of attention, while also placing me at the edge. Not excluded, not rejected, simply repositioned. Like a piece on a board slowly moved away from the center. The morning of the baby shower arrived cold and bright. Snow had stopped falling overnight, leaving the ground covered in a clean white layer that reflected the pale winter sun. I stood in front of my mirror for a long time before leaving, studying my reflection as if I could find answers in it. I chose a simple dark blue dress and a light coat. Nothing that would draw attention. Nothing that would make me appear emotional or unstable. When I arrived at the venue, a small rented hall decorated in soft pastel colors, I immediately felt the weight of preparation. Flowers arranged along every table. Balloons floating near the ceiling. Soft music playing in the background. Laughter already filling the room. Claire greeted guests at the entrance wearing a light pink dress, her hair styled perfectly, her expression warm and radiant. When she saw me, she smiled and walked over immediately. "I am so glad you came," she said, wrapping her arms around me briefly. It felt practiced, controlled. "Of course," I replied. "This is family." She smiled at that word as if it confirmed something important. Daniel arrived shortly after with the children. He looked relieved when he saw me standing there. "Mom," he said, hugging me tightly. "I am glad you are here." I nodded, forcing a small smile. But my attention kept returning to Claire. She moved through the room effortlessly, greeting guests, accepting congratulations, laughing softly at the right moments. Everyone seemed drawn to her presence. She had become the center of gravity, without anyone noticing how it happened. I noticed Ethan Calloway near the refreshment table speaking quietly with a small group of guests. When his eyes briefly met mine, he gave a polite nod. Nothing more. But something about the distance between us felt deliberate, as if too many things had already been decided without being spoken. The baby shower continued with games and speeches. Daniel gave a short emotional speech about family and new beginnings. The guests applauded warmly. Claire placed a hand gently on her stomach and smiled with visible emotion. It was a perfect scene, almost too perfect. I sat quietly, observing, listening, waiting. And somewhere beneath the surface of all that celebration, I felt something building. Not anger, not fear, something closer to certainty. Because I understood now that this moment was not the end of anything. It was the point where everything would finally be revealed. The baby shower reached its peak just after noon, when the room was full of soft laughter, clinking glasses, and the gentle rustle of gift wrapping being torn open. Claire stood at the center of it all like she had been placed there intentionally by invisible hands. Every movement she made was measured, every smile timed perfectly, every reaction aligned with the expectations of the room. I remained seated near the back, observing rather than participating, feeling like someone standing behind glass while life continued on the other side. Daniel was beside me at first, but he kept getting pulled into conversations with guests, old friends, and co-workers who congratulated him as if everything in his life was finally aligning into something stable and beautiful. Claire eventually called everyone's attention to the front of the room. A small decorated table had been set up with gifts arranged neatly behind it. A banner above read welcoming phrases about new beginnings and family joy. She tapped a glass lightly with a spoon, and the room gradually quieted. "I just want to thank everyone for being here today," she began softly. Her voice carried easily across the room without effort. "This baby means everything to me and Daniel, and we are so grateful for all the love and support." Applause followed immediately. Daniel smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. Everything about the moment looked complete, balanced, final. Claire's eyes briefly scanned the room before landing on me for a fraction of a second. There was no emotion in it that I could easily name. Not anger, not fear, something more precise. Awareness, as if she knew I was no longer simply observing. I felt it then, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like air pressure changing before a storm arrives. Claire reached for a small envelope on the table and held it up. "Before we open gifts," she said gently, "there is something special I want to share with all of you." The room leaned in slightly, curiosity replacing casual conversation. Daniel looked confused but stayed smiling. Claire walked slowly toward the center of the room, holding the envelope carefully between her fingers. "Some of you already know how important family history is to me," she continued, "and how much I respect the legacy I have joined." The word legacy felt heavier this time, more deliberate. She turned slightly toward Daniel. "Your father built something meaningful," she said, "and I have always admired that." Daniel nodded, still not sensing anything unusual. Claire then looked toward me again, this time longer, more direct. "And I have always respected Margaret for protecting this family for so many years." The wording was intentional. Protecting, not loving, not leading, protecting. I felt several eyes briefly shift toward me, then away again. Claire opened the envelope slowly, drawing out a single sheet of paper. The room became quieter, sensing the change in tone. "Before we go any further," she said calmly, "I think it is important to clarify something." Daniel stepped slightly closer to her. "Claire, what is this?" he asked, still smiling but now uncertain. She did not answer him immediately. Instead, she unfolded the paper and held it up just enough for people near the front to see. "This is a confirmation document," she said, "related to family estate discussions and financial planning meetings that took place over the last year of Harold Hale's life." The room shifted instantly. Conversations stopped completely. Daniel's expression changed. "What are you talking about?" he asked more seriously now. Claire turned toward him with calm patience. "I know this is unexpected," she said softly, "but there are things your mother has misunderstood regarding those meetings and their purpose." I felt my heartbeat slow rather than speed up, because I realized something in that moment. This was not a reaction. This was preparation. Claire continued speaking as if addressing the entire room equally. "There has been confusion about certain documents and who was present during financial discussions," she said, "and I believe it is important to prevent misunderstandings from affecting family relationships." I stood slowly, not abruptly, not emotionally, just deliberately. Every movement in the room seemed to pause slightly as people noticed. Daniel turned toward me. "Mom," he said quietly. I looked at Claire first. She did not look surprised that I had stood. She expected it. "You planned this," I said calmly. Claire tilted her head slightly. I am simply clarifying facts, she replied. I walked forward a few steps, so I was no longer sitting at the edge of the room. Now I was visible. Fully. Then clarify everything, I said. The room held its breath. Claire looked at Daniel, then back at me. Very well, she said softly. Then let us be completely honest. And in that moment, I understood that whatever she was about to say would not just respond to my suspicions. It would decide how everyone in that room would remember me. From that day forward,